And that something in the world was, guess what? The Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, or these chain revolutions that began in Tunis and moved on to Egypt and Libya, are certainly good things for those countries. I'm strongly in favor of the Arab Spring. I also very much hope that the Arab Spring will also touch Syria and will be able to transform the very authoritarian and brutal dictatorship in that country to a democratic regime. The Arab Spring is also good that it is bringing Islamist movements in those countries that have been suppressed by the regimes, secular dictatorships. Secular doesn't mean liberal or democratic, by the way, necessarily. Those parties are now entering the political system. They are becoming members of the Egyptian parliament. They are not in the torture chambers of Hosni Mubarak anymore. They are actors in the democratic game. That's all welcome. And I think that democratic transition will inevitably make those Islamist parties like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt more pragmatic and moderate over time. However, when we speak about democracy in the Muslim world, democracy in late developing countries, in late democratizing countries, anywhere actually, we should keep in mind an important nuance. There's a difference between liberal democracy and illiberal democracy. When we speak about democracy in the West, we generally mean it's liberal democracy, and liberal democracy is a democracy that is confined with constitutional liberalism, which makes sure that the rights of minorities and every individual is protected by law, and even, I would say, political culture. But if you don't have that liberalism in your foundations, you can have illiberal democracy. In other words, an elected majority can pass a law or pass regulations which will curb the rights of minorities or individuals. That's why right now in Egypt there is a concern that the Islamist MPs in the Egyptian parliament will pass laws, maybe, that will minimize the rights of Egyptian women, which would be a problem. That's why I think this long-time debate on Islam and democracy in the Middle East, which is very important, should also focus on Islam and liberalism as well, and should focus on this issue of individual freedom. And that's what my book is all about. Islam Without Extremes, A Muslim Case for Liberty is basically an argument to bring forward a case for liberalism based on Islamic foundations. Now, some people think that's an oxymoron. I mean, Islam and liberalism, they would never come together, and these are, totally incompatible concepts. Well, some people were saying the same thing for democracy until a few decades ago, but now many people are actually accepting the idea of democracy within Islamic societies. So we shouldn't be that, I think, skeptical. And in my book, I actually explore some maybe little noticed theological bases in Islam to advance liberalism, and I have a few arguments. And I'll just share just a few of them with you right now. Well, one of them is the thing that I've been telling you, that with coercion, you cannot actually create genuine piety, if that's your goal. With coercion, you can at best create hypocrisy, and that's really not a, very good thing to achieve from an Islamic point of view. So you should accept people's freedom to make religious choices. That's one thing. Now, the other argument, what I call the argument from pluralism, is also very important. And let me try to explain a little bit. From the time of Prophet Muhammad, there has been very different interpretations and understandings of Islam. Like there has been many different understandings and interpretations of Christianity, in the Western world. And since there is no divinely mandated authority in Islam after Prophet Muhammad, no one can actually claim to know which interpretation is ultimately exactly true. So if anyone says, I'm establishing an Islamic state, which will run this wonderful religious police, which will impose Islam on people, what they're actually doing is to establish the state of their own understanding of Islam. In Saudi Arabia, they have an Islamic state based on the Wahhabi understanding of Islam, which I respect, but I don't share. In Iran, they have an understanding of Islam based on the Shiite tradition, and actually it's reinterpretation by Ayatollah Khomeini. Taliban was a whole different story in their own thing. in very different confederal tribal system and very harsh to many Muslims. So, if this is the case, we should ask this question: does anybody really have the right to say, well, this is the right Islam and I'm imposing on anybody? Does anybody have the right to say, this is the right Islam and I will make other Muslims accept this interpretation? Well, this was actually a very hotly debated topic in early Islamic history. In the face of the first civil war in Islam, different groups have emerged, Sunnis and Shiites and even different groups, and they all had an answer to what went right and what went wrong. One group among these different interpretations was the most fanatical of them, called the Khawarij, the Kharijites, or dissenters in English. These were the earliest and most fanatical group, the earliest fanatics, I should say, in Islam, because they said, well, only we know what is right, and we can, of course, impose it on other Muslims. We can even kill them for rejecting the truth, because we have access to the truth. So this is certainly, or some people see a parallelism between Al-Qaeda of today and the Khawarij of that first initial century of Islam. These are the ultimate fanatics. But on the other end of the spectrum, there was a different group, a very interesting group, which rejected this authoritarianism because they said, well, on this debate of who's right and who's wrong, they said, we don't know who's right and who's wrong. It is only God who ultimately knows who's right and wrong. So they said, we should postpone our debates and discussions to afterlife, to be resolved by God in the Judgment Day. And that's why this group was called the postponers in Arabic, called in Murji'ites in their original name. And now that's a very interesting theology because it creates a basis for pluralism, and a pluralism in which no Muslim can impose its value on other Muslims because maybe they will have differing opinions. And it was very interesting for me to find this very same argument, the argument that disputes should be, theological disputes should be postponed to God, postponed to afterlife to be resolved by God, in the books of none other than the founder of British classical liberalism, John Locke. In his letter concerning toleration, John Locke says the exact same thing. 1,000 years after the Murji'ites, he says, there are many churches in England, and since the only Almighty knows which one has the ultimate truth, they should just tolerate each other and live in peace and in pluralism. Well, I'm paraphrasing that a little bit. He's spoken in a more Shakespearean way. But now, when you see things like that, and I have other arguments in the book for building a more liberal political culture in the Muslim world, you see that both in Islam and in Christianity, there are theological bases to nurture human freedom, to vindicate human freedom. But both Muslims and Christians have nasty historical experiences with coercion. I mean, we have our religious police. The Christian used to have this thing called the Inquisition for a long time. I just hope that we won't have to wait that long to get rid of our Inquisitions. And our inquisitors, I should say. And I believe that all of us will be more true to the foundations of our faiths when we express those faiths within not coercion, within not tyranny, but within liberty. Thank you so much.